Chairman, I'd like to welcome our witnesses, and to be honest with you, I like yourselves, I'm very disappointed that the department, 3 departments I mentioned, 3 of them, not one could attend here today, but any of the Department of Housing, Local Government, the Environment,
just to be clear, Deputy Collins,
one was asked.
Only one has refused.
I know,
the others are coming in 2 weeks' time.
Sadly, that one has refused, and might have cleared up a few matters here today. Might have put in a foundation to save these jobs in the horticulture sector that are vital in rural communities, and maybe that's the reason why they're not here today, because that might have its own. It might have its own meaning. Look, from what I can gather, and the witnesses, I'm going to maybe lay out all my questions, because the witnesses might have different witnesses might want to answer them. That falls under their category. From what I can gather, in the horticulture sector, major problems with new media, the peat in the soil is happening this season. Even with 30% peat in growing media plants, growing is very poor, and the grower and consumers getting away poor products, and it's going to put growers out of business next season. Questions: do you know, is the government going to restart limited harvesting to give a transition period to allow compost makers to create a product that works for growers? The second question I have is, will growers get any support from experts in finding ways to get solution using the new peat-free media? It's not working for growers at all, from what I can gather. The third question is any peat still being exported from Ireland abroad? Irish peat for Irish growers from bogs that can never be repaired. And the last question is, why did the government not put a grant to landowners of bogs to block drains, we'll say in the budget, when those bogs can't be used by horticulture, but somehow are allowed to sit emitting greenhouse gases?
Okay, who wants to take those questions?
Can I take one? Just because it touches on Victor's question as well. In terms of the R&D, the only reason that we have been able to do this R&D is because we felt our hand was forced. Now, we do want to be a sustainable mushroom producer. The retailers want it as well, but we do need to get there by 2030. We have had to use our own industry investment, taking growers' money altogether. We have now managed to get the department on board, but our only way of investment is via the producer organisation scheme. There's no other pot of money that we've been able to avail of. So we would really respect government support on that. And even transitioning to peat-free by 2030, it'll cost us 19 million, not in terms of actually processing this new substrate, but in terms of lost yield by using it in the first place till we get to an optimal blueprint, and also in the cost of the input cost of the materials that we need and the processes that we need to do. So that's 19 million over 5 years, and I'm only speaking on behalf of our members. So there's the whole Irish mushroom industry. The other, so that was about R&D, and then Victor also touched on why is this not happening, and I'm pretty new to these discussions on peat harvesting, but all I can see is, and Victor said, is siloed departments, that you have to go to 3 departments to try and get a licence, and these guys have been trying since 2010, 2011, and they're having to go through the courts, so that doesn't add up. There's something fundamentally wrong in the system, and surely it's about getting the right people in the room and making it happen.
Chairperson, I would like to, as my colleague Kevin Mahan, Senator Boyan and Deputy Collins were asking about alternatives and the issues with those. So Kevin Mahan from Classroom would have good experience what's happening on the ground and that.
Yes, our company have been producing their own compost since 1991 and wood fibre since back then. Here in Ireland, we've been using bark and wood fibre since about 2004. We've been actually making our own wood fibre on site since 2013. I acknowledge what Deputy Collins has said. There are challenges when using these alternative materials, and it's why peat moss has been the material of choice since the 1960s. It has the qualities of peat moss are that it has very good water holding capacity and nutrient buffering. When you introduce these alternatives, they don't hold the water as well, and they don't hold the nutrients as well. So typically, you have to water at least 30% more. You use about a third more fertilizer because you experience more leaching. So there are negative environmental consequences to diluting these alternatives. The more immediate problem we have with the alternatives, if there's no peat available, is the alternatives are equally becoming unavailable. So, for example, our wood fibre production, we require wood chips, which is a residue from the sawmills. Our main supplier, who we were getting 10 loads a week from back in July, we're now been reduced to 2 loads per week because of the energy requirements for making wood pellets for fuel, for heating. Also, because of the downturn in the construction industry, there's less wood being processed, so obviously there's less residuals available. Even before this, there wasn't sufficient bark to possibly replace all the peat that's required in the country. In addition, as Mr. Gleeson said, none of these alternatives, with the exception of probably coir, can be used 100%. So you can only use these alternatives, have to be diluted with something else. And the only something else that we really have in any volume is peat moss. The other people say about green compost, for example, there's big problems with consistency in green compost. You can't rely on the sourcing of it. It contains contaminants, which can be glass, feces, needles, plastics. You get all sorts in it, unless the source material is very well controlled. And by the way, 40% of our product goes into the food production. So that's a major problem for us. The other advantage of peat is clearly you're dealing with a virgin product that hasn't had any animals grazing on it. It hasn't had any litter. What's happening is the green waste is collected from municipal sites. And of course, you're going to collect whatever debris is left on these municipal sites. The other issue is cost. The wood chips, price of wood chip and bark is linked to the cost of energy. So yesterday, if you saw it in Farmers Journal or Agriland, I can't remember which, Bordemona announced that they need 1 million tonnes of biomass to fuel the power station in Edenderry. Now, where are they going to get that? They're going to be burning the same wood chips and bark that we want to supply the likes of Kieran and the Kildare growers. And the costs, like we can, sure, we'll compete, go toe to toe with the energy industry to compete and buy the material, but ultimately, energy is a more profitable business than horticulture. Let's face it. So I think we're going to come out. The whole industry will come out as a loser in this battle. Coir is another. It's an excellent product that we bring in from India and Sri Lanka. It's horrendously expensive. Again, it's a residual of the coconut industry. Coconuts are primarily produced for oil and the flesh of the coconut. So the coir that we use is the husk. But unfortunately, coir, if you consider coconut oil, is now considered in the same category as palm oil. So it's detrimental. It can be if it's not sustainably harvested. You know, palm oil has a bad name. Well, unfortunately, what's happening now is we're losing another excellent product, coir, because we now have customers asking for products that are not just peat-free but coir-free. And that's a practical impossibility without coir and without peat to produce a good quality growing media. The other issues with the alternatives is that peat has a very low pH, so it's suitable for any sort of crop. You can add the right amount of lime, so it's suitable for ericaceous crops, for heathers, low pH requirements. All these alternatives start off with a high pH. So you cannot, there's certain crops that are not suitable. So for example, heathers in 100% coir mix, they won't grow very well because the pH is too high. I think that's probably enough said about alternatives unless there's any other questions.
Okay.
Deputy Collins, you raised a question about exports, and I'm really delighted that that question has been raised, because over the past months and year there has been misinformation, figures quoted incorrectly, not the details. And I'll ask my colleague James Spillane to just elaborate a little bit on that and explain how the figures are misleading.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, sir.
Just maybe to round off some of the points here. First of all, to answer your question, Deputy Collins, it's likely that Ireland will become a net importer of peat if we haven't already got there. We certainly will in the very near future. That's to support the mushroom industry, specialist growers and growers who can't at this point in time grow without some peat. So that's something of an inevitability for the moment. There have, as John was saying, there's been quite a lot of statistics quoted in the House and in the media and online with regard to peat exports, all of it inaccurate, unfortunately. The figures gathered are gathered by the CSO from Customs and Excise under a code which is peat and agglomerates. And just to clarify what that is, the agglomerates are all of the things that Kevin was referring to. So it's the wood fibre and the bark fines and the fertiliser and a whole raft of other ingredients, coir, pumice and so on and so forth, that's blended to reduce the amount of peat going out or being used. So what we're really doing is we're trying immensely hard as an industry to find alternatives and use alternatives, and it's being quoted back to us as though it's peat. So the code which the CSO provides is peat and agglomerates, which is peat and alternatives. So the fact of the matter is less and less peat is being exported every day, practically none at this stage, given the situation whereby Bord na Móna, who in the House have acknowledged that they had exported for a period of time into the statistics and no longer are doing so, but that is in the numbers. The agglomerates situation is showing numbers which are inaccurate, and there is an element of north-south exports as well, so we take some peat north and south and process it for growers specifically. But by and large, the quantities are becoming irrelevant in the grand scheme of things.